The moment we open our eyes, we are trying to solve a puzzle. Why did the Roman Empire fall? Why does this medicine work the way it does?
Why did my computer program crash right before I saved?
Exactly. At its root, this is the universal human desire to explain reality. So today, we're going to tackle the biggest idea of all. What does it actually mean for A to cause B?
We are launching a deep investigation into one of the oldest and most consequential problems in philosophy, looking at how Western thought, from Aristotle to Kant, has tried to map the fundamental concept of cause
Across nature, human action, and history itself.
And as we unpack this vast historical conversation for you, it's worth noting how we're doing it.
Right. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic essay analysis. It allows us to process this kind of vast information and distill these complex ideas for you very quickly.
And the source material guiding our discussion today is the landmark introductory essay on the Great Idea Cause, which you can find in Volume 1 of The Great Ideas, a Syntopicon of great books of the Western world.
Its position in that collection says a lot. It's right there among other essential metaphysical topics like being, chance, change, and fate.
It really shows you just how foundational the idea of causation is to all of Western inquiry.
And what's so brilliant about Mortimer Adler's approach in this essay is that he's not trying to sell you on one specific theory.
No, not at all. His main purpose is simply to clarify the landscape.
To map the conversation. To identify the persistent questions and the main lines of disagreement that structure the debate across centuries, so you know exactly which philosophical argument you're engaging with when you talk about causes.
And to start mapping that territory, we need a broad conceptual foundation. The Syntopicon provides one. They define a cause simply as that upon which something depends for its being or coming to be.
That is such a crucial starting point. It immediately pushes us beyond the narrow modern idea, the one often used in science, which focuses only on regular succession.
Or just statistical correlation. This definition is much bigger. It covers physical dependence, logical dependence, and even moral dependence, a key distinction.
Absolutely. And the central structure, the axis around which this entire tradition revolves, is the fourfold scheme of causes.
First laid out by Aristotle. And even though not all subsequent thinkers accepted this framework, they all had to respond to it. It really defines the terms of the debate.
Okay, let's unpack these four. Maybe we can use a modern example. Say, building a smart home device, like a virtual assistant.
Perfect.
So first, you have the efficient cause.
That's the agent that produces the change. The workers, the assembly line, the electricity.
Or the engineer who wrote the code. It's the trigger, the doer.
Exactly. Then second is the material cause. That's the stuff it's made of.
The silicon, the plastic casing, the wiring.
And the raw data that was fed into the training models. That's all material.
Okay, third is the formal cause. This is the structure, the pattern.
That which makes a thing the kind of thing it is. In our example, it would be the specific architectural design of the hardware, the algorithms, and the operating system that define its functionality.
And the blueprint.
The blueprint, precisely. And finally, the most philosophical and often the most contested is the final cause.
The end, the aim, the purpose for which the device exists.
Right. The goal of serving the user, or automating household tasks, or maybe collecting data for a corporation. It's the why.
So this core part scheme really frames the indispensable questions the essay explores. For instance, if you accept all four, you immediately face the problem of whether causal necessity is actually real.
Is it an objective power in the world? Or is it merely a habit of thought we develop after seeing things happen the same way 100 times?
That distinction is monumental.
It is. And other key questions come up, like, do causes always have to come before their effects in time? That gets tricky when you talk about final causes, where the purpose seems to precede the action.
And of course, the huge theological challenge that dominated the medieval era, whether divine causality, where God is the first cause, is compatible with created causes.
Does God's sovereignty just nullify the real power of creatures to do things? A massive debate.
And what's so powerful about Adler's map is that it forces you to realize that disputes about causation are rarely just about causation.
They're often displaced debates about other foundational ideas. If you argue about chance, for example, you are implicitly taking a position on how strict and pervasive causal necessity must be.
Right. It connects tightly with necessity, fate, nature, and law. The essay makes it so clear that these great ideas form one giant, integrated philosophical network.
You can't just pull one out and examine it in isolation.
Okay, let's pivot to the history, because the definition of cause changes so drastically depending on the era and, well, which of those four causes thinkers chose to emphasize or reject.
We can start with the ancient foundations. Even the pre-Socratics were trying to find explanatory causes for cosmic order or flux.
Usually related to fundamental elements like water or fire, right?
Yes, or some organizing principle like mind, in the case of Anaxagoras. These were really proto-scientific searches for the efficient or material source.
Then came Plato, who focused on explanation through perfect forms and the ultimate good.
He leaned heavily toward formal and final causes as the true explanations for why things are. For Plato, the truest cause was always the ideal blueprint. He was often critical of purely mechanical explanations.
But then Aristotle provided the classical system.
He did. He insisted that genuine scientific understanding, what he called episteme, requires knowing all four causes. And crucially, if you missed the formal cause and the final cause, the pattern and the purpose, you just hadn't achieved a complete explanation.
So for him, a full understanding of a tree wasn't just the sun and water.
No, that's just the efficient cause. It was also its formal nature as a tree and its purpose, its final cause of growing to maturity.
That robust Aristotelian structure then gets meticulously absorbed and adapted during the medieval period.
Right, the medieval integration. Thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas had the great challenge of fitting the four causes into a Christian theological framework centered on divine providence.
And they executed this masterful balancing act.
They really did. They distinguished God as the ultimate first cause from creatures, which they said act as secondary causes.
So the universe isn't just a machine, but it's also not just a puppet show.
Exactly. It's a hierarchy where created things have real, genuine efficacy. They truly cause things to happen, but they are entirely dependent on God for that power. So many theological debates about miracles or free will hinged on this precise interaction.
But this balance was shattered. The modern transformation in the 17th century changed everything.
It was a seismic shift. With thinkers like Descartes, Hobbes, and later Newton, and the rise of mathematical physics, the focus narrowed dramatically.
The new worldview demanded quantifiable, repeatable, mechanical explanations.
Which favored efficient causes, the push and the pull, and the formulation of universal mathematical laws. Formal and final causes were systematically marginalized.
Why did they get rid of purpose? I mean, it seems so intuitive to ask why we do things.
Because teleology, the study of purpose, was seen as unscientific, unquantifiable. Why should a rock have a purpose?
It's anthropomorphic.
Right. By eliminating purpose from nature, they stripped the universe of intrinsic meaning and allowed purely quantitative science to flourish. The universe was no longer a living organism aiming at perfection. It became a giant, indifferent clockwork machine.
Which sets the stage perfectly for David Hume. Having reduced causality down to this mechanical efficiency, Hume then steps in with his radical skeptical challenge.
And he asks, how do we know the push and pull is even necessary? He questioned whether we ever truly perceive a necessary connection between A and B.
When a billiard ball hits another, we see motion, then we see more motion.
What he called constant conjunction. We don't see the magical force or the necessary link that binds them.
So for Hume, the idea of cause might just be that observation plus our own psychological expectation that it will happen again.
It becomes a problem of the mind's habit, not an objective truth about the world itself.
And that, of course, led to Immanuel Kant's spectacular response.
Oh.
He acknowledged Hume's problem, but refused to settle for mere psychological habit.
Kant argued that causality wasn't in the world, nor was it just a habit. He relocated causal necessity into the fundamental a priori structure of human understanding.
Think of it this way. Kant essentially said causality isn't something we find out there. It's a necessary conceptual lens, a pair of conceptual glasses that our minds must put on to make sense of anything at all.
We don't read causality off the world. We impose it to structure our experience, an essential, non-negotiable mental filter.
Before we delve into the permanent philosophical disagreements that these historical shifts created, let's take a moment. If you are finding clarity in this deep dive into philosophical concepts, you might enjoy our YouTube channel.
We call it Mindful Moments. It's our YouTube channel offering AI essay analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
Now, returning to the essay, these historical shifts have solidified certain philosophical positions that remain in fierce opposition today. Adler's essay maps these battlegrounds so clearly.
The first major division is realism versus skepticism.
Okay, so on one side, you have thinkers like the Aristotelian or Thomistic realists and many scientific realists defending causation as an objective, active feature of reality, actual powers or natures doing work.
Then on the other side stand the Humean approaches and some positivists who maintain that cause is merely a convenient shorthand for observed regularities. A useful fiction, perhaps, but not a metaphysical reality.
That is a foundational split. It affects everything from quantum physics to legal reasoning.
It does. And another key tension, fueled by that modern shift, involves the hierarchy of causes, the problem of reductionism.
This goes back to that controversial final cause. Is purpose genuine?
Or can every purpose-driven explanation be fully reduced to efficient, mechanical processes at a lower physical level? This is critical for modern scientific disciplines.
Like, can psychology be reduced entirely to neurochemistry?
Or can sociology be reduced to individual psychological behaviors? The question is whether higher-level causes like rational agency or social structures represent distinct explanatory levels, or if they're just complicated side effects of physics.
Which, of course, brings us immediately to the profound entanglement of all this with ethics, causation and responsibility. You just can't separate the two.
The debate over whether a fully deterministic causal order, where every event is the inevitable effect of prior causes, is compatible with human freedom. Well, it's one of the most persistent and consequential.
If every action is determined, are we truly responsible for our choices?
And Adler's essay highlights this by consistently cross-referencing cause with freedom and law. When a court tries to decide who is responsible for a harm, they are fundamentally engaging in causal analysis.
Was the person who acted the direct, efficient cause, or just an intermediate step in a larger deterministic chain?
So what does this all mean for someone trying to be well-informed today? The relevance is huge.
The educational value of reading this essay is immense because it really trains you to recognize the different kinds of causal claims being made.
Think about epidemiology, climate science, or economics. When someone claims to have found a definitive causal link, say smoking causes cancer or policy A caused outcome B, you need to understand what they mean.
Is it an efficient mechanism, just a statistical correlation, or something else?
This essay trains you to ask not just what happened, but why did it happen and in what sense?
And it extends directly into history and politics. Disputes over whether great men like Churchill or impersonal structures like geographic resources
Or economic forces, or even ideas themselves are the main causes of major events, like the start of World War II. These debates mirror these deep philosophical disagreements over which type of cause has primacy.
Are we explaining history with efficient causes? The actions of leaders or material causes like resources and demographics?
In concluding his grand analysis, Adler offers a unifying perspective. He doesn't declare a winner in the causality debate. He can't.
The essay succeeds because it maps where progress has been made in clarifying the questions. But it also proves that certain core disagreements remain permanently open controversies.
Like the true status of necessary connection and the compatibility of causation with freedom.
That's the persistent challenge and the enduring value of the great ideas. And here is our final provocative thought for you to chew on. The idea of cause is central to a true liberal education because it encourages syntopical reading.
It forces you to compare multiple authors across time on the exact same issue, instead of passively absorbing one textbook account.
And that demanding comparative analysis is the true path to a deeper understanding of reality.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth essay summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based essay podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.